Hey class, Prof JC here. We're diving into our mental models, and this week we're going to look at the concept of systems thinking. Again, we talked about what mental models are. I don't want to belabor the point. Mental models are ways of thinking, right? You have mental models already. I do. It's how you see the world. It's anytime you make a decision, kind of the thought process you go through. That's a mental model. Right? We've used a lot of examples for it. Um, Typically, what happens is we move from information to emotion to decision. A mental model, right, replaces that emotion. Because often, as you know and as I know, emotions can get us in trouble when we're talking about decision making. So instead of moving from information, emotion, decision, we want to move from information, mental model to decision, right? And so we're listing off a lot of mental models. The wisdom that comes in this comes over time when you understand what the best mental model is for the issue that you're looking at. Okay, so whatever that issue may be, and maybe what you do, and this is something I've done in my own life, is you run that issue that you're having, you run it through several mental models, and you look at it from several different ways outside of your own emotions, right? This one we're going to talk about today really is, I think, an important mental model for you to have long term. Okay. And we've talked about long term thinking, but this mental model, I'm saying it's one that you really want to keep in your toolbox because you want to come back to. I think that this is probably one of the most important ones. Now, I would say that because in my master's program, I actually did my entire master's program around this whole thing that we're going to talk about today, systems thinking. I was originally getting my MBA from Pepperdine University, and I backed out because it was so expensive, and I knew I wanted to get a doctorate, and I needed to have money left over for a doctorate. But I found this small college really that had this master's of business, and when I started to research, I found out that they were talking about this thing called systems thinking, that a lot of their work was around this, and I had no clue what it was, but the more I started researching, I thought, I want to learn about this, and so that's what I did. Most of my master's work is in this area of systems thinking. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you, and let's dive in. Okay, so here's the article that I found for us. Tools for systems thinkers. Now, this is on medium.com, and I know that this is not an academic page, but this is an incredible article that really talks about systems thinking. There's so many pages that I could take you to, and there's so many things we could talk about, but I thought that this one really kind of sums it up. So I want to look at this, and then I want to take you to a couple of visuals, and through the visuals you'll be able to see what we're talking about. So I'm gonna talk a lot. I'm gonna read a lot off this website right here. Okay, so if you're doing something, you can watch me or you can walk away and just kind of listen to what I'm saying. Here's the most important thing that I want you to take away from this idea of systems thinking, okay? And then we'll kind of dive into what she talks about, the 6 fundamental concepts of systems thinking. Here's the most important thing you need to understand. Everything is interconnected. Everything is interconnected, okay? If you get that, if you grasp that concept, then you're going to understand what systems thinking is about. So let's dive in here, okay? I'll read just a little bit of whatever we need to read, and then we'll just kind of skip through the 6 aspects, and then I'll show you the diagrams, and then we'll get to our question for the week. In this series on system thinking, I share. Now, this isn't me. This is the author. I share the key insights and tools needed to develop and advance a systems mindset for dealing with complex problem solving and transitioning to the circular economy. Okay, remember that idea. Everything is interconnected. And then the author goes on to say, I've taught thousands of hours of workshops in systems, sustainability, and design, and over the years we find ways of rapidly engaging people with the 3-dimensional mindset needed to think and work in circular systems. My motivation for writing this online toolkit is to help expand the ability of professionals to rapidly adopt to a systems mindset for positive impact. Words have power, and in systems thinking, we use some very specific words that intentionally define a different set of actions to mainstream thinking. Words like synthesis, emergence, interconnectedness, and feedback loops can be overwhelming for some people since they have very specific meanings in relation to systems. Allow me to start off with the exploration of 6 themes, okay? And then She goes on to note here, there are more than 6, but I picked the most important ones that you definitely, in bold, need to know. And as we progress through the systems toolkit, I will expand on some of the other key terms that make up a systems mindset. Okay? Interconnectedness. So this is the most important thing, okay? When we talk about this idea of systems thinking, if you remember anything, remember this, okay? Interconnectedness. Systems thinking requires a shift in mindset away from linear, and I'll show you a diagram about that here in a second, but away from linear to circular. The fundamental principle of this shift is that everything is interconnected. Everything. Okay, we talk about interconnectedness not in a spiritual way, but in a biological sciences way. Essentially, everything is relying upon something else for survival. Humans need food, air, and water to sustain our bodies, and trees need carbon dioxide and sunlight to thrive. Everything needs something else, often a complex array of other things to survive. Inanimate objects are also reliant on other things. A chair needs a tree to grow to provide its wood, and a cell phone needs electricity distribution to power it. So when we say everything is interconnected from a systems thinking perspective, we are defining a fundamental principle of life. From this, we can shift the way we see the world from a linear, structured, mechanical worldview to a dynamic, chaotic, interconnected array of relationships and feedback loops. I really like that sentence right there. Okay, from linear, structured, and mechanical to really understanding that life is, the world is, the marketplace is dynamic, right? That means it's always changing, it's always in flux, it's chaotic, it's interconnected, right? It's an interconnected array of relationships and feedback loops, and that's all the stuff that we're going to talk about today. A systems thinker uses his mindset, uses this mindset to untangle and work within the complexity of life on Earth. And here's a great quote by Donella Meadows. A system is a set of related components that work together in a particular environment to perform whatever functions are required to achieve the system's objective. Number 2 is this: synthesis. Synthesis. Okay. In general, synthesis refers to the combining of 2 or more things to create something new. When it comes to systems thinking, the goal is synthesis as opposed to analysis, which is the dissection of complexity into manageable components. Analysis fits into the mechanical and reductionist worldview where the world is broken down into parts. But all systems are dynamic and often complex. Thus, we need a more holistic approach to understanding phenomena. Synthesis is about understanding the world and the parts at the same time, along with the relationships and the connections that make up the dynamics of the whole. Essentially, synthesis is the ability to see interconnectedness. So we talked about that up here. Everything is interconnected. Okay? That's a mindset shift that you have to be thinking about in every decision, in every organization, in every family. Right? Everything is connected. I'm going to get to what all this means here in just a second. I'll give you an example and why this is important for you to think that way. But this other piece, synthesis, means that you have the ability to see this interconnectedness. Okay, so it's got this great picture down here, interconnected feedback loops. Right? That means you see the connections and you see how everything works together. So when you're staring at a situation, you're staring at a person, you're staring at a concept, you're staring at an organization, you're staring at a team, whatever it may be. When you really understand a systems mindset, you understand that so much more goes into what you're looking at, not just what you're looking at. That there's a whole connected system that created that thing, whatever that thing is in front of you, that created it, for better and for worse, right? So if an employee does a wonderful job, it's easy just to tell that employee, great job, it's you, it's you, it's you. But really there's a system that created this employee. If an employee doesn't do a great job, if an employee's not doing a great job, systems mindset looks at that and says there's a whole system that created this employee to not do well. Okay, so all of that's important. Now, these first 2 points are probably the most important points that I want you to take away. I'll read a little bit from the other ones of these next 4, but really the first 2 are the most important. Emergence, number 3, from a systems perspective, we know that larger things emerge from smaller parts. Emergence is the natural outcome of things coming together, right? In the most abstract sense, emergence describes the universal concept of how life emerges from individual biological elements in diverse and unique ways. Emergence is the outcome of the synergy of the parts, of the synergies of the parts. It is about uh, linearity, linearity. I should know how to say that one. I don't. Non-linearity. If someone knows how to say that, please text me and tell me that. And self-organization. And we often use the term emergence to describe the outcome of things interacting together. So it's important to understand that everything is connected. Then synergy is the ability to see it. And what emergency is, emergence, not emergency, emergence, right, is the outcome of things interacting together. Okay? So in an organization, and I want you to think about the company where you work, that systems mindset is understanding that everything works together. Your synergy, right, is your ability to see that everything works together. Emergence now is once you see it, you're able to see and to describe, right? Emergence is describing the outcome of those things that are interacting together. You're able to see, right? And so an example they give is a snowflake. It forms out of environmental factors and biological elements, right? So a snowflake doesn't just create itself, and it's just not just made. There's a whole system that comes together to create a snowflake. So the temperature has to be right. Freezing water particles form into beautiful fractured patterns around a single molecule of matter, such as a speck of pollution, a spore, or even a dead skin cell, right? All these things can, work together to create they emerge, right? This is the emergent to create this snowflake, right? And again, it's describing the outcome of all these things interacting together. And the outcome in this case is the snowflake. Feedback loops. Since everything is connected, there are constant feedback loops and flows between elements of a system. Okay, so we can observe, understand, and intervene in feedback loops once we understand their types and dynamics. The two main types of feedback loops are reinforcing and balancing. What can be confusing is a reinforcing feedback loop is not usually a good thing. This happens when elements in a system reinforce more of the same, such as population growth or algae growing exponentially in a pond. In reinforcing loops, an abundance of one element can continually refine itself, which often leads to it taking over. A balancing feedback loop, however, is where elements within the system balance things out. Okay, nature basically got this down to a T with the predator-prey situation, right? We often talk about this idea of the what is that, right? When we see somebody doing something stupid, maybe, right? You see them on Instagram, and you'll see it in the comments, and they talk about the law of natural selection, right? You'll see the comments, and it'll say natural selection, fine at work, right? And what that law talks about is the law of natural selection means that the universe, that the earth is always balancing itself out, right? So it's bringing in the new, it's getting rid of the old, right? We talked about that with this idea of creative destruction, how we need to be doing that, right? The universe is good about doing that. That's why the universe has stuck around for so many years, and that's why we need to be careful with our planet, right? So that we're able to continue, and the planet's able on its own, to continue creative destruction. Right, human beings often get in the way. But what this is saying, though, is that the balancing feedback loop is when. So it's saying right there that nature does this better than almost anything else. It balances itself out, right? But if you take too much of one animal from an ecosystem, the next thing you know, you have a population explosion of another, which is another type of feedback, which is reinforcing. Okay, so it's important to understand that. So again, it's important to understand that consequences over here. So an example right now, okay, of what we thought was really an exciting thing. So during the pandemic, we saw a lot of tech jobs begin to hire. They begin to hire, and we saw exponential growth. So much growth, right? And we got excited about this company, these tech companies are growing, and how exciting this is, and how exciting it is. And now we've come through the pandemic, and they realize they've hired too much. Okay. They had too many people. And the sad thing is there are people who left stable jobs making a little bit less money, but they left stable jobs because of the excitement around this exponential growth during the pandemic, and they moved from that job and they moved over here to the tech world, the tech space, where some of these jobs are now laying off, and now we see the position that they're in, right? As I'm recording this in February of 2023, and the thousands of people who've been laid off. right? So a way to look at that in the future is next time something, and obviously we're probably not going to have another pandemic like what we just had for another 100 years, right? If it follows in the same pattern, right? That's another key to systems thinking is patterns. So, but next time we see this exponential growth and people start chasing off to go, find these dream jobs, they need to realize this. It's this right here. If you take too much from one ecosystem, the next thing you know, you have like what it's talking about here in nature, you have a population explosion in another, which is another type of feedback, right? And so that's what we saw, right? We saw something that seemed great, but then long term, as you begin to play it out, it was too much of growth. And now we have a lot of people who are suffering because of it. Now, there's a lot of things that go into that as well. I understand that shareholders, capitalism, the whole system of capitalism, which rewards shareholders more than it does keeping these people employed, right? There's a whole system. But what I'm trying to say is that we have to think deeper next time. And systems thinking is not just thinking about what's happening right now. It's thinking long term. Right? You understand that there's a history that brought you to this point. You understand that there's a future that you have to continue to think about. That's systems thinking. Okay. That's this idea of feedback loops, is looking at all the potentials, all the tentacles that go into that one situation that you're thinking about right now. 5, causality. Understanding feedback loops is about gaining perspective of causality, how one thing results in another thing in a dynamic and constantly evolving system. And in parentheses, it says all systems are dynamic and constantly changing in some way. That is the essence of life. So again, we have the pandemic. We have we have this exponential growth of some of these tech firms, which is great. It's exciting. It's great. People leaving their jobs, going to, flying out to these tech firms, moving as quick as they can to the tech firm. But again, a systems approach would have said, okay, if there's exponential growth, at some point that's going to have to end, right? With inflation comes recession, right? There's this whole thing, right? So you've got to be able to think this way and see, okay, so what's the cause, both positive and negative? The instant cause, right? And we'll talk about this in a few weeks, third order of consequences. The immediate cause was, wow, there's a lot of growth in tech. There's incredible growth in tech. But maybe if somebody had paused and said, okay, let's think about this 5-10 years down the road. Pandemic ends, less people on Zoom, less people using tech, less people do, right? So is there going to be this need down the road? And maybe someone else should have thought about it, in their own perspective. And I'm not shaming anybody who's been laid off. I've been laid off from jobs before. That is no fun to go through. But what I'm saying is there could be a lesson for next time we go through this, is understand causality. I want to come down here to this picture right here. And here's what I'm talking about. This is classic systems thinking. So we've got this chart here, and what we see is actions lead to results, which shape the future, that lead to actions, which lead to results. Okay, so let me give you an example about this. Okay, so let's say actions are, you've got a poor neighborhood of whatever race, and I'm not even going to go there, but you've got a poor neighborhood in, let's say Los Angeles. Okay, and the actions that happen in the neighborhood, possibly because of poverty, but I don't want to say it. Let's just say there's crime. Let's just start with the action of crime, okay? And let's say I'm going to go full on and say, Chicago, you've probably heard about this before, an incredible amount of shootings that they have there. So let's say the actions are shootings in neighborhoods. So what do those actions lead to? Well, so what are the results? Well, you've got people who are dead, and obviously you have a lot of fear in those neighborhoods, which shape the future, right? Those results do. They shape the future, which lead to what actions? I'll throw out some actions here. There's a lot of fear, right? That's shaping the future, and the action leads to less people going to school in that neighborhood, in that community, which then leads to the results of less people getting educated, less people changing their mindset around what they need to do to change the neighborhood, which then shapes the future and leads to what? If less people are going to school, then they're finding other things to do, probably not going to get a full-time job, probably not going out and do those responsible things. Maybe they're having babies. I'm just throwing out something. They're having babies. So these are actions that they take, which leads to the results of more kids being raised in homes that aren't educated, that are in crime kind of ridden neighborhoods, right, where there's a lot of fear, and that leads to actions which are X, Y. So you see how this continues to go. We've got to understand this with systems thinking, right? Every action leads to result, which shapes the future, which leads to more action, which leads to results, right? It's constantly moving. That's the dynamic aspect of what systems thinking is. Everything is interconnected. Synthesis is the fact that you're able to see that everything is interconnected. Okay. Emergence, right, is the outcome of the things that are interacting together. Feedback loops consistently happen, reinforcing or balancing, right? Like some in the universe, they balance each other out. Often there's reinforcing, right, where this thing happens and we don't realize, but it leads to this over here, right? Causality, there's a cause, there's a cause and effect, and it says that cause and effect are pretty common concepts in many professions and life in general, right? And parents try to teach this, right? Causality as a concept in system thinking is really about being able to decipher the way things influence each other in the system, and they do. There's always a cause, there's always an effect. You've got to remember this. And then our sixth one is this: systems mapping. Systems mapping is one of the key tools to a systems thinker. Okay, there are ways to map from analog mapping to complex digital feedback analysis, right? So I'm not going to go into that very much, but there's ways to map this out. And a lot of this is through this idea of pattern recognition, right? Once you're able to see, right, what the different effects are. Think about a community that we just talked about up here, right? If you're able to now chart that out and what all the decisions are, what all the causes are, and what all the feedback loops are, and what all the, right, you're able to kind of see what works in the system, what doesn't work in the system, and how to make all that happen. Okay, so the most important things you got to understand is that everything is interconnected in a system. Okay, and I can't stress this enough. This is probably one of the most important ways that you need to start thinking. Everything is interconnected. So in a practical way, if you have an employee that comes to your organization and they're late all the time, it will be easy for you to say, well, this is a bad employee, they're fired. A great leader who understands systems thinking says, okay, what is, and let's say it's someone who's habitually late. Okay, so it's easy to say, well, next time you do this, you're fired. But maybe there's other things. Well, I guarantee there are other things in the system, and it goes all the way back to hiring. Why did we hire a person that's that is consistently late? Right, so there's an issue over there. Maybe we didn't call the references. Maybe we didn't find out that this person is always late to everything. Okay, so that could be something in our system way back at the beginning. There could be something going on at home that we don't know about. So we've got to have a conversation and figure out, hey, you are consistently late. We want to know what's going on. Is you're dropping your kids off at this amount of time? Do we need to ask you to come in about 15 minutes later so we can solve this problem? You have a conversation with that person. There might be something where other people are showing up late. So it's like, well, I see my boss showing up late all the time, so why can't I show up late, right? So there's all these things that come into play into making this happen. We've got to figure this out. So systems thinking, here's some tools of a system thinker. It's moving from disconnection to interconnectedness. It's moving from linear, like everything's a straight line, to circular. It's moving from silos where we're all kind of over and on to emergence, and then recognizing how these how these little issues and patterns begin to work together. It's moving from thinking about the part to the whole. Again, this person consistently showing up late. Okay, that's a part of the system. A whole system is like what in this entire system, this entire ecosystem of this individual is making it so that they're consistently showing up late. And can we fix that? And if we can't, and again, maybe it's just a hiring issue. Our HR they're not calling and asking the right questions so we can find out about these employees. It could be that. It could be anything, right? So, but you got to think about the whole, not just a single. From analysis to synthesis, right? Analysis is kind of one on, this and this. And again, we talk about synthesis as being able to see how all parts are connected from isolation to relationships. Again, everything is connected to the next thing. And again, there's another chart here, right? From analytical thinking to systems thinking, right? Analytical thinking is the knowledge. It's the how things work, okay? Systems thinking is understanding why do things work the way they do, okay? How is the person's late, okay? How are they late? Well, they're showing up and they're clocking in 7 minutes late every single day. You're fired. Systems thinking, hey, I want to understand this better. Why is this person showing up late? Why is this thing happening the way it does, right? So the analysis, you take the engine apart, okay? Synthesis is, what is the engine a part of? Analysis is to identify the properties and behavior of the parts taken separately. Synthesis is to understand the behavior as the whole, right? That's the car, right? And so you can kind of read that there, right? It's just understanding that a system is always taken to approach everything within the context, Okay. If you've got, we think about communities, you know, certain communities in our our nation that are doing extremely well. And it's easy to look at those communities and say, well, it's because of XYZ. Those people work harder than those people over there. No, there's so much more that goes into it than that. Again, systems thinking is able to say, well, why is it that those people work harder? Why is it these people are not working as hard? Why is there prosperity over in this neighborhood? Why is there a lack of prosperity in this neighborhood? And then you dive in and you begin to ask the questions. Systems thinking, again, it's dynamic, it's chaotic, it's messy. And it's understanding that that's just how life is. Okay? That's how the organization, that's how teams are. Okay? So, that's what I want you to be thinking about. That's a mental model that I want you to carry with you long term, because I promise you it will change how you make decisions. It will change how you think when you begin to see that everything is interconnected. Everything is interconnected. Now, here's the question I have for you today. Based on what we just talked about, okay, I want you to look at a system that you've been a part of, and maybe it's the organization where you work. And I want you to name a situation that has happened in one part of the organization and how it impacted another part. Or maybe it's a community, maybe it's a family, maybe it's a team, whatever. But I want you to picture something over here, and what were the unintended consequences that happened over here? Okay, systems thinking. Okay, and then I want you, just in your own opinion, okay, to figure out, why did that happen? Okay, because that's the system thinking. Okay, so I want you to look at an organization or a team, something you're attached to. Try to keep it professional if you can. I mean, if you got to talk about your family, if that's what you have, then go ahead and do that. But I want you to look at an organization or a team. Okay, and I want you to look at a decision that was made that had some maybe unintended consequences. Okay, and now how do you, from a systems perspective, what are the right questions to ask in order to put this situation back together the way it needs to go? I hope that makes sense. A team or an organization, something that was made, a decision that was made that had unintended consequences that impacted other parts of the system. And then from your perspective, your opinion, what needs to be done in order to fix that situation. But again, thinking from a systems perspective. I hope that makes sense. If not, feel free to reach out, email me, and I'll make sure to make that question a little bit more clear. Systems thinking, I promise you, if you begin to think this way, it will be an incredible way for you to think about life and leadership. I'll see you next week. Take care.